please. Thank you all. So here you are at the session between Jamf and Okta Device Trust. And I don't know if Mr. Sean here requires an introduction, but I'm going to give him a chance to do it first because, hey, well, actually not first, second, because first is worst. So I'm John Lettinen. I have been in the identity industry for about 20 years, about 17 of that, working in big enterprise. So I've been around the block a few times, and I joined Okta about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. And so my point of view in all of these things is as a practitioner. I'll get into what it is I do here, despite me having vendor sync in a moment. And Mr. Rabbit?
I'm just this guy. It's okay. You all know me. So I'm Sean Rabbit, Senior Consulting Engineer, Identity and Access Management at Jamf. Can I say it any faster? Yes. On we go.
Fantastic. All right, so Jamf and Okta Device Trust. This is what we're going to go through today, right? So what is Okta Device Trust? We're going to get our taxonomies all squared. We're going to talk about the Okta on Okta experience. So Okta on Okta is my function. You'll hear about that on the next slide. We'll look through the Jamf Pro setup and deployment, the end user experience when using Okta Device Trust in Jamf Pro, and then see how all of this stuff does affect Jamf Connect or not. So I have an incredibly intuitive title. I am the Senior Director of Okta and Okta at Okta. Consider how sonorous all those soft vowel sounds and explosives from the back of the throat are each time I say it. But yeah, like it's self-explanatory and you don't need to overthink this. We have a sufficiently generic mission at Okta and Okta, which is to deliver a best-in-class experience for our employees and customers. Cool, it's high-level corporate speak, et cetera. But how we do it is across 3 pillars, and this is where things get really cool. There we go. Our first one is going to be the most familiar for any practicing technologist. That is to enable the business. We provide and run our instance of the Okta platform, so that way Okta can run its business on its own platform. So that's table stakes at any other company as well. What really makes Okta and Okta neat, in my opinion, is the other 2 things we get to do. There we go. Such as evolving the product. As a little bit of a lag, but cool. We evolve the product, which is we partner with our security, product engineering, everybody team to say, Okta needs this as a growing company. Okta needs that, right? Or there's these trends in the industry or these rough user experiences. We play the part of customer number 0 to try to make sure that we are demonstrate the confidence we have in our own platforms. And then, last but certainly not least, because this gets the field team super excited, we go out there and we tell the stories about how we are doing it. People like to hear from the people who are accountable for actually doing things and not just hyping product pitches, no offense. So, as a result, oh, you're a doer. Heck, I shouldn't be trashing you.
I write documentation so people can ignore it.
Oh, hell yeah. Song of my people, my friend. All right. So yeah, then we showcase the platform doing things like this, offering best practice discussions. We love meeting with customers and even people who aren't even Okta customers, working with our field team. So we're always here to talk and talk shop with folk. So let us go. So what is Okta Device Trust? Okta Device Trust is a device, it's 2 pieces of information. First is the Okta Verify agent on the device. And by agent, I mean the application. Many of you may be familiar with this. It's what you use for multi-factor authentication, push notifications, etc. So the user initiates that registration of the Okta Verify app on a device with Okta Device Trust by authenticating themselves. So we authenticate the user to bind that trust anchor for the device, and now we have a credible source for the platform to use as a source of trust and receive all the MFA sets we need. Now the second component of this is device management. So we have this notion of 2 levels of registration with Okta Device Trust. The first is for your bring your own device use case unmanaged. By installing and configuring Okta FastPass, you enter a state in that device in your Okta directory, and that is registered, which means Okta Verify is in there. The user has authenticated through that instance of Okta Verify, and now the FastPass experience, which is a passwordless and nowadays phishing-resistant implementation of sign-in, works really, really good. So that's for the BYOD, but let's say you need a higher level of security. It's able to interface with your MDM platform like Jamf to recognize that it's getting a certificate pushed to it and is under MDM. Those are called managed devices, and you're going to see eventually how we use both of those in our policies for different level of assurance and access. There we go.
Now the big difference here is that Apple considers privacy paramount amongst all of its application developers and any app that's installed on the device. Because of that, you're limited to what information you can actually collect on that device as running that application. MDM, on the other hand, and the reason why Jamf is up here on stage talking is because we now know everything about that device. We have the agent on the device, and we're able to get more than just the basic information like, is the device actually encrypted? So we can actually create a list of rules to say, is this device truly secure, and report that to the identity provider. Because it's not just enough to establish trust on the device to say it's managed. I want to know what the state of the device is under management. What we can do here is with the MDM framework, we'll be able to actually get additional things to establish a baseline of trust. So instead of just knowing that File Vault's enabled, I can actually have entire smart computer groups or smart inventory information like under iOS smart device groups to be able to determine if somebody is in compliance or not and be able to report that. This is something similar you might have heard in a previous presentation that I gave here about talking about how another identity provider happens to use Jamf Pro for this information as well. There's just limitations that other apps can have, so I could say something like, did somebody turn off File Vault on this device? When that inventory updates, I can say it falls out of the group in the smart computer group or smart device group there, and I can say remove the Okta Verify app off the device, notifying Okta that's no longer under compliance there. Or I could simply just go in and say, okay, did you do something silly? Let me gank that SCEP cert that's off that device immediately that's used to verify to Okta that it's under our control. Instant calculation on the inventory to be able to send those notifications to Okta.
So working together, your Jamf administrator and your Okta administrator, they're going to use this information in two very important ways that are going to allow your Apple users to access your resources. So the first is a list of authenticators that you are allowing for your organization. So this is where you can establish the use of Okta Verify app, the Okta FastPass experiencing, phishing-resistant methods. You can also establish requirements around the use of biometrics, Face ID, Touch ID, other platform authenticators as well. Next up, the global session policy. So like it says in the description, these are policies which are going to apply and take precedence over any other kind of policy and procedure during login time. So those of you still on Okta Classic with Jamf Connect, you're going to know this is where you establish a policy to require MFA for all the logons in the past. We're going to get into some use cases around that a bit later, but with Identity Engine, you can't establish global rules like requiring different rules. I'm sorry, you can, not can't, establish rules like requiring different rules based on IP location, risk level, device fingerprinting, posturing, user behavior, etc. So the last is the individual authentication policies which are applied to individual applications. You can set very granular rules for your individual applications here, and a perfect example is setting a different MFA an MFA rule for Jamf groups and users enrolling in Jamf Pro. So consider part of your onboarding. Maybe new users, as part of that, are required to sign up using a password, or worse, multi-factor authentication, but not really worse, through the company device. But then we start entering the chicken and egg scenario of how Jamf Pro works. You can make a rule that's going to allow Jamf Pro authentication to facilitate the onboarding, but always set it so Jamf Pro folk will require multi-factor authentication. Every application can have distinct rules based on user device and overall risk and sensitivity of the resource being accessed. So, first, let's enable Okta Verify so we can use it as an authenticator for our device trust deployment. So, your organization may have several authenticators for different reasons. If any of you are Okta customers and heading to Octane, we're going to talk an awful lot about which authenticators we feel very strongly about there, so hopefully you have a chance to see more there. So these authenticators, like a FIDO hardware token, or to access something that is very sensitive, phishing-resistant authenticators for the high-assurance applications. But perhaps you don't need quite that level of assurance as much for, or as intense or device-bound an authenticator for certain different use cases, right? So when you combine those combinations, we can manage from MDM, right? So we can manage Okta Verify via the MDM. And then when we combine the requirements for the management of our biometrics, Okta Verify can offer the protection required for phishing-resistant authentication. And when you select the Add Authenticator, we pick Okta Verify. And you're going to see an option to enable Okta FastPass and verify with Okta FastPass. So this is not necessarily directly related to device trust, but the FastPass experience and Okta device access signals actually do play into some contextual authentication items, which we'll touch on in a moment. But most interestingly, this also enables the workflow for the single sign-on extension for Apple devices. So when combined with Okta Device Trust in your authentication rules, you can have the brass ring, the real dream of true SSO, one login, and not mashing the same credentials 27 times a day. More on that in a moment. So next, we're going to need to allow other factors than just password, which is by default. Come to Octane, big developments on that front, as the default method for authenticating into a resource. So the global sessions policy is going to apply to all your authentication events, as we have stated, and they are evaluated from top to bottom. So inside of this example, we've got a policy set to number one that allows a specific set of users, in this case, all Jamf employees and a special group of Mark Buffington's personal test accounts, to use this rule. So rules are also evaluated top to bottom. And in this case, we have a rule that allows us to establish a user session and authenticate with any factor that meets the authentication policy requirements. If we had a password picked to fulfill that, the user would be forced to use a password to authenticate anytime instead of a more modern option like Okta Verify, FastPass, FIDO2 tokens, or passkeys. So, yeah, I'm like Meatloaf on stage when I perform. I'm like, yeah, so don't mind me. All right, so some additional options are available to all of these rules. Global rules could be set for users outside of a known territory or network range, or high-risk groups may be forced to use multi-factor authentication. So there's a lot of power in these rules, but this is where you can start stumbling into some unforeseen consequences, but because they apply to all logons. You want to look for counter-indicated patterns, so your QA is going to be pretty important here. A good example of this is the Jamf Connect to log into your computer. Jamf Connect uses the Okta Authentication API to silently check if a user can authenticate into the corresponding OIDC app inside the tenant, right? If a user, and to grant those administrator rights to a local Mac user, if you demand that all the logins have MFA, and usually you want to have MFA for administrative purposes, but clearly this is an example of where a pattern that may be unexpected will emerge, right? The user is always going to be able to, if you enforce MFA for that Jamf Connect sign-on on that OIDC policy, the user is never going to be able to silently log in. As a result, they're not going to be able to get their administrative access on their standard. They'll be issued a standard account. So this just emphasizes, again, the importance and the need for testing before you roll this out. All right, so finally, we get to the granular application of authentication policies on a per resource basis. So Okta gives you several pre-built policies, for example, like password only, any two factors, and special rules for the Okta dashboard and the Okta admin page. Now, inside of each one of these rules, there we go, we see a set, again, of priorities for the rules to be applied. So rules, like those global policies, are managed from top to bottom. So if a group with a higher priority has a rule that allows the authentication to complete, the rule stops being evaluated. So if a rule specifically blocks access to a resource, or if the context of the login does not apply for that rule, the next rule gets evaluated in the chain. So in this example, we're going to see a list of priorities. So if one of Mark's test accounts is authenticating on a registered and managed device, the user will authenticate by using Okta Verify alone. That'll fulfill the policy. But if it isn't a member of Mark's test accounts, we move on down to the next rule. Here we're checking to see if the user is coming in from a specific IP address range, like the traffic was routed through Jamf Security Cloud. If that factor doesn't work, you proceed further down the rule until a rule specifically allows, or the final rule totally blocks access to that resource. There we go.
Now, when we edit a rule, we can actually see where device trust comes into play. We can make rules specific for device state, like if the device registered. That would be a case where maybe it's a personally owned device that has the Okta Verify app manually installed, or installed maybe via MDM but not actually marked as registered. It didn't come down with an app config, for example. If we want to trust that device a little bit more, maybe we want it to get TOTP codes but not log into critical applications, maybe we'll be able to use something like that. Next, we see if the device is managed as well. Now, I personally like my organizationally managed devices to be trusted a little bit more, so if we can do that, we can actually create rules that can have different attributes, like is this a Mac that is managed and has Okta Verify on the device. There we go. When we go through this, we actually see a set of rules of a flowchart for how we actually would be able to figure out if a person is able to get into the device. So is this person using an approved authenticator? Then we would hit the global authentication policies to determine if that authenticator is accepted. Not block them. Tell them they got to go get an authenticator. Did this global access policy allow authentication? Then we go down to the specific access rule, and then is that authentication request available for that specific user on that specific rule? If yes, let them into the resource. If no, deny them authentication. Pretty simple. Just got to go through 3 little steps. So in order to determine if a device is registered or not, we have to make sure that they have a couple different things. On the Mac and iOS and iPadOS devices, we have to have Okta Verify installed onto the device. The user has to log into that application at least once. They have to physically do an interactive login into that application. That will register the device in Okta's universal directory and make sure that it's marked as managed and registered. Now, keep in mind that it actually will keep a separate keychain entry with that information on a user level. So on macOS specifically, it actually drops a keychain entry of its own design into the keychains directory. That is not accessible at the login window. So keep that in mind when you're writing your application, your authentication policies for getting into something like the device itself, like say if you're using Jamf Connect, a little app I know much about. So you can't get, is this device managed at the login window. For macOS, we determine if the device is actually managed by using a skep-cert profile pushed down to the device. Real simple. You're going to be able to set this up in about 10 minutes. It is so sweet. Okta does all the work for you. I love it so much. You just basically make a config profile that pushes down to the device. That will be scoped onto the device using what is determined to be trusted on that device. Is it in a trusted state? That smart computer group that you use for scoping on that can literally contain anything. So it could be something simple like, is the device currently enrolled? Is it got an up-to-date operating system? Or it could be something as complex as using the Jamf compliance editor to go through the full CIS guidelines to whatever standard that you desire and say, yes, if you are at this point, then you get a certificate. Congratulations, Okta now thinks that you're managed. For iOS, it's a little bit different. You're actually going to push a management hint down with the app config to the device. The management hint is something that you're going to grab from Okta and you're going to just copy-pasta it right into the app config for it. But you would then scope onto the device the full Okta Verify application based off of your smart device group at that point. So your smart device group does have a little bit more limited settings for what you can determine if the device is compliant or not, but it's whatever's within the MDM spec to determine device state, so we can use that to say, yep, you have a current version of iOS on the device, awesome, you get the Okta Verify app. Oh, you're out of date by 3 versions? Yank that sucker.
All right. So now to really put to the test this whole Okta and Okta, how are we actually using this within Okta itself? So here's a little bit of a tour behind the curtain on this regard. There we go. All right. So we have, I guess an easy way to say this would be 5 main authentication policies that we route all of our applications through. We have a lot of advantages being a cloud-first company. So I'm not really well-versed in some of the niche use cases for this, but here's how we use these policies for most of our web apps, and here is the situation under which and what you get under it. There we go. So for the unmanaged device, it is user-employee onboarding, activating something like Jamf Connect, registering your initial authenticators, and getting in. There's also this notion of a lost or stolen device, right? In that case, you definitionally aren't necessarily going to have access to any sort of device management or device posture stuff to engage with your help desk. So we allow that for that. Device trust features in use, I mean, this should be pretty intuitive, pretty unmanaged, not available. So we're not evaluating a lot of stuff for there. There we go. So the kind of authenticators we allow in our unmanaged policy, you know, you think for being unmanaged, we would be like pretty low security. We still push hard for things like re-registering and setting up FastPass, having a web authent platform authenticator, and then pairing that with a knowledge factor. And we're not going to allow a session to be issued for an unmanaged device. You're going to have to authenticate each and every time. So next up is our low assurance policy. These are kind of like the data apps where information gets out. Things like Okta TV where we broadcast our all-hands meetings. You know, stuff where there's not a lot of sensitivity or perhaps access to the Okta dashboard. Here, we are layering on some behavioral detection policies that come care of Okta Verify having been installed. We are using a CrowdStrike plugin as part of this to kind of have that black box risk evaluation. And we're constantly working with the security team to reevaluate what those policy thresholds are and elevate them and things like that. We permit the two flavors of managed device here, the registered for the BYOD use case and the managed for work app, for your workstation. And so in terms of authentication, we're going to need one of the following two. We need FastPass. We use FastPass a lot at Okta. It's about 90+% of our authentication. So that gives us, at the very least, a phishing-resistant, non-interactive authentication, but you can also do it with a biometric. We'll get that in a moment. And you get issued a 12-hour session, so you won't be challenged again. Now, the medium assurance policy is where we do our productivity apps. These are things like, you know, Jira, Google Workspace, et cetera. Here, we start ratcheting our policies a little bit more. We want, there we go. We're going to see some of the friends here like CrowdStrike, but CrowdStrike's now perhaps ratcheted a little higher. We use the behavioral detection. We permit registered BYOD. Unmanaged device signals is a new feature here. So for those registered devices, I've alluded to how Okta Verify can take a look at what you have even without MDM. We currently do not use MDM at Okta. So what we can get is some very coarse-grained signals about, is the device encrypted? What operating system is it on? And then you can build policies that say, well, let's force them to not be able to access our resources if they're like, you know, 2 point releases behind in their iOS device, for example. Once again, the notion of we manage for the work stuff and then the Okta Verify device access signals, which get a little bit more enriched, as Sean has already indicated, when you're paired with an MDM platform or an endpoint management system. All right, so for the authentication and app policy, we require FastPass used in a phishing-resistant plus biometric mode, or a web authent plus a biometric or a PIN. You can also pair password with FastPass without the biometric check, or password with a web authent, but to be fair, our policies are changing all the time. We're constantly on a journey, so even these are slightly out of date. Come to Octane, I have so much to show you. All right, once again, you get a 12-hour session. All right, so we have this notion kind of medium assurance productivity party, a policy. Again, we want to facilitate our field teams to be able to work dynamically, but we also don't use MDM, so you know, we're going to want to make some carve-outs for our mobile device policy, and that's what this is. Otherwise, it's very, very similar. Next, please. To the same features, security features, and what you get as our traditional medium policy. And with that, you can authenticate using much of the same things. If the main distinction here is if you are managed, we permit the device to, or the session to be 12 hours. If you're on an unmanaged device, you're gonna have to re-authenticate with a high level of assurance every time. But again, with FastPass experience, it is pretty fast. But I still hear a lot of internal complaints, but hey, you know, we're all here to make our users secure and have a delightful experience, so there's always more to do. All right, so finally, our high assurance policy, and funny story with this one. Yeah, let's just not reveal it, cool. These are the crown jewels. These are the things where, you know, apps with PII, the stuff that we can get in really hot water for if we ever had a breach. You'll find that we're layering on a lot of the same things, but we've tightened up our CrowdStrike policy. It looks like I whiffed doing that on the slide, so oops. So we have a tighter CrowdStrike policy. We require a managed and work-issued laptop for this. No BYD, no nothing else. So And what the authentication requirements are, identical to the mediums. The difference is you're always going to be forced to log in, and you cannot use a BYOD device for anything that is in that high assurance policy. So it's further ratcheted down so that way people can be able to work and be as effective as they can, but also when it really counts, we want a tight ecosystem. And with that, we establish what is effectively a nice defense-in-depth, zero-trust architecture pattern, right? We're authenticating the device. The device trust is part of this architectural model for securing your organization. So we establish identity of the user by registering the device, which they're on. By managing the device, we go further on the information about the device and establish a baseline for our organization's trust. And we get a check if the endpoint's protected with security software. Is the software up to date? Is iOS up to date? Is that collaboration and meeting tool everyone uses up to date with the version, with no known vulnerabilities? Is our network traffic routed through the appropriate tunnels or relays? So we combine all this information with strong user authentication, phishing-resistant credentials, and then some identity context analysis using things like CrowdStrike signals or the behavioral signals to make sure everything's within a standardized baseline. In doing so, we are fulfilling zero trust by authenticating the user, the device, evaluating the context, constantly reevaluating our policies.
Beautiful. And just to clarify, you are using MDM at Okta.
So this is where this is clearly not my field because I think MDM mobile, because I'm a little greeny when it comes to what all y'all do here. I just talk identity and identity accessories. So I will say, yes, we use MDM in the sense we're managing our fleet of workstations. Mobile personal devices, no MDM. We just use Okta Verify.
There we go. I was going to say, there's this little company that you do use to manage your Mac fleet, right?
Well, hey, we're on a learning. We're all growing and developing our skills.
It's all good. Here, let me teach you how to set it up in Jamf Pro, just in case you need to know how to use it.
Thank you, Sean.
It's all good. All right, we're going to do this pretty quick here, not because I don't love you, but because it's actually pretty simple to set up here. So for this piece for doing device trust, you're going to definitely need to be upgraded to Okta Identity Engine. If you're on Okta Classic, there are ways to do this, but you might as well just do the upgrade first, because honestly, it's way more secure. You're going to need the certificate authority that's created by Okta, and that's the reason why you want to be on Identity Engine, because it'll actually make your life much easier instead of using a scary Python script. You're going to need the app config that's going to be created by Okta as well. You're going to grab VPP copies of Okta Verify to push out to all the devices. You want to be on at least macOS 11 or 15 for iPadOS and iOS here for you. First, we're going to actually set up in Okta to do the basics for getting device trust running. Security, device integrations, WAC add a platform. You're going to go inside there and say, I just need to go in and set up the CA, and it's going to automatically be able to grab that SCEP URL that you're going to add in as a config profile into Jamf Pro later. You're going to want to record the username and password that you create in this field here too. You will not be able to see them again without recreating it, which is a lot of fun. QR code, direct link to Okta's documentation on how to set this up, by the way. Super, super simple. Inside of Jamf Pro, SCEP payload, config profiles for macOS devices. You're going to go in and create a SCEP profile, drop and copy pasta some information in there. You want to make sure that is marked as non-exportable. Very important. Why did Rabbit just pause there? Because if somebody exports that keychain and puts it onto a non-managed device, it thinks it's managed. So let's mark it non-exportable and try to keep that away from people. We will allow all apps access so that way applications like Okta Verify can grab that information. Next, we gotta grab the management hint for iOS. So again, we go back into security device integrations, add a platform, select iOS. Record the secret key. Secret key is basically going to be a client secret that you're going to copy and paste into the wonderful world of the app config. This is the only time you're going to be able to see it. Grab it again. QR code this time goes specifically to the iOS instructions there, but they're all basically linked together. Drop this again, non-exportable from the keychain, allow all apps access. We want to, well, that's the wrong instruction inside my notes. Nice job, Sean. Anyway, we're going to mark this so that way it's marked as, okay, if you mark the device as convert unmanaged app to managed and you try to push this out to iOS devices that are BYO, it will not work. especially if you're coming in through account-driven user enrollment. So you may have to create multiple versions of this app registration inside of Jamf Pro. You can actually create multiple VPP apps just with slightly different names, with different app configs in there, and target them to different scopes of groups. For example, when you go in and actually see the app config that comes in here, this is the only key that you need, which is just the app secret. But if you read the documentation from Okta Verify, there's additional keys that you can add in there, like being able to send down the UUID of the device, which of course MDM knows, but the app wouldn't know for app security. Thanks, Apple. You could actually pass that information through. Now, if it's a BYO device, it's not going to know the UUID when it comes in through account-driven user enrollment. So you can cheat. You can actually do things like send the JSS ID down to Okta to see in the universal directory. So if something goofs up in the logs and you just want to go real quick and say, okay, which device were they really using? Bang, I know it's just the JSS ID and I can go and grab it really fast. So you can create as many of these registrations based on different scoping that you need. There's that pretty version of it. Secret key goes here. Whoops, can we go back one? Now, when you're actually setting up inside the management attestation, there's this little itty bitty tiny link inside there that says something that Okta really wants you to do. And what's that? They really want you to set up the single sign-on extension for enterprise. That's a good SSOE. You might as well do it while you're here because you got everything that you need on the device. You got Okta Verify on your macOS device and your iOS device, and this means that when you sign in once, you will never sign in again. It is the greatest thing ever. All you need to do is follow the link here for how to set up that actual config profile and push it out to your devices that contain Okta Verify. We use it internally at Jamf. It is a life changer. Oh my gosh, I do not sign into my Okta-gated things a million times a day. It is so fantastic. The only bit of excitement for the iOS device is that you do have to throw the management hint into this key as well. It's a custom P list that you have to put into the bottom, edit it up in your favorite editor, Code Runner, whatever you'd like to do, slap it in the bottom as an added in P list, and you're good to go. Now, for macOS, you don't actually have to add in that special secret because, of course, it uses the SCEP cert. So it just uses that as part of the single sign-on extension to determine if you are good to go. And from that point, everything that you ever log into ever again will automatically be logged in once and forever. There we go. Let's watch a video to see how this actually works here for you, too. I'm going to follow along with y'all. So, managed device, we've got it inside of Jamf Pro already. We push down Okta Verify via VPP application. This is something that you can actually set through a configuration profile to not make it so people have to type in their URL. So you can actually do that for the end user. They just would whack the button saying, yep, I'm a brand new device. They log in interactively once, at least once here. They'll log in with whatever the rules are in order to get in. I recorded this on a Mac Mini. Guess what I did right after I went and recorded that step? Yeah, I went out and bought a new keyboard that has Touch ID on it because, boy, that's nice to have. If you do mark it as any of your authentication rules in Okta to say that it does require a Touch ID or a biometric authentication, you can have that be known to the device, Okta Verify. You can use Okta Verify as a Touch ID source. Then anytime you go in to log into something, no password. It's gorgeous. So if you go in to do things like activate Jamf Trust, auto-logged in. You go into insert gated thing here. Oh, it's so nice. Makes my life so much easier. So when you are doing some debugging on your side as a Jamf Pro administrator, you might want to know, okay, so why the heck did Okta Verify not prompt me for SSOE? The trick here is you might need to talk to your coworkers who might not have given you access who has access to their Okta and their Jamf Pro. Wow, that's more than I expected. So good. So this is for the other three of you here, okay? It's kind of complicated looking at the sign-in rules for Okta because it's got a lot of details inside there. But when you go in and look look for your time date stamped login attempt that you make on your non-production test machine, blah, blah, blah. You know, everyone's got a tester. There's going to be a set of targets underneath it. And the targets actually say, this is the policy globally that I went to go look at first. Was the authenticator actually accepted, yes or no? Next is the global authentication policy. Which one did I use to determine that rule? Then what's the application policy and which rule applied? Keep in mind that literally every application rule has one that says sign in or catch-all. Is it catch-all? Yeah, catch-all rule or catch-all policy. So you might want to make a policy that duplicates whatever that is right before the one that says catch-all policy and name it something specific. Like if your catch-all policy says block this user, great, which catch-all policy did it? Create another policy right above it and name it something obvious so you can look in the logs and find it and see it real easy. Pretty awesome. How does this affect Jamf Connect? Because boy, does it. There are a couple different ways that you can actually set up Jamf Connect with the new Okta. And unfortunately, there's also additional ways on top of this because, sir, not appearing in this recording here, which this keynote was made in August, so we've made some changes. So you have 3 different ways that you can set up Okta with Jamf Connect right now. One is the traditional way. I was using Okta before the new version of Jamf Connect came out. I had it when it was classic, no problem. That configuration will continue working when you switch over to Okta Identity Engine. You don't need to make changes if you don't want to. 2, the new hotness, Okta Identity Engine and the Okta Authentication API with the Identity Engine. You got to go turn on some new claims. It works really well. It uses an OIDC app in order to do the verification and assignment of people being able to log in. Simplifies your setup a little bit. 3rd is you actually set up Jamf Connect like every other identity provider does and set up an OIDC application. The trick is that if you were on Classic before, you used to have the I want to turn on MFA or not through a global session policy and nothing else. Like when you turned it on for global, it meant you were global. Literally every application you ever set up in Okta had to have MFA. If you do it the new way with either Okta Identity Engine or Okta as an OIDC app, you can set it up so you have individual rules for just Jamf Connect. So you maybe, if I want to have a rule to get in to see the time clock, maybe I don't need MFA. Maybe when I get into all the Macs, I have to have MFA. So if we're going in through this new method, let's see, there's our same thing. So if we're using the Okta Authentication API in any way, either Okta as Classic or Okta Identity Engine as the new piece, it still uses the global evaluation, the global access policy. Does it allow authentication? Is there an MFA method required for me to do the background check or elevate your permissions to be an admin? If so, there's no way for me to do that MFA, so you'll be blocked from that access and you won't get admin rights, or maybe you'll be blocked from getting into your computer. Then we can actually do does the single app allow for single factor authentication, which is the new system. I'm going to have instructions on my GitHub to be able to explain this a little bit easier for the new system. But basically, if you're using anything that involves the API, make sure that whatever that app is you're authenticating to can be done silently with just a username and password. The authentication rule has to be just username and password, but we can still set it up so you get MFA at the login screen. So for OIDC apps with admin rights, the classic way, right now you could go into Jamf Connect and say these are the access ID, client secondary ID, people who get admin rights. That cannot have MFA. Will fail every single time. But if you set it up as an OIDC app, it works perfectly fine because I can actually account for that to say, oh, I'm sending a username and password, it's asking for MFA, background check, no problem. That's fine. I'll accept that as an acceptable answer. The difference between setting it up as OIDC versus the application method, the API method there, is that I have only one difference. When I use it through the API, picking either Okta as the normal classic mode or Okta as a Okta Identity Engine mode, I can restrict the second account made on a Mac. So like, let's say that I'm taking your computer. I walk up to your computer randomly. I'm not an IT administrator. I should not be able to make an account on your machine. But Mike over here is really smart looking and looks like he's part of the IT team and needs to do something one-off on your computer. He's allowed to make an account on your Mac. That way Jimmy from accounting can't walk over to the CIO's computer and start sending out wires to his new Nigerian prince friend. It's the idea. You do it with OIDC, it means that anybody who's got the correct permissions to access any of the Macs can access any of the Macs and get a new account made on it. So there's reasons why it's there. We covered a lot of stuff in a short period of time, and we only left a little bit of time for Q&A here at the end, but I want to say that we will have these slides available. I'm going to put them, if nothing else, up on my GitHub. My username on GitHub is Sean-Rabbit, 2 B's, 2 T's. I'm rabbit like Eddie, not rabbit like Easter. And we'll have some notes up there as well. There will also be some updated instructions coming out soon, too, for the new version of Jamf Connect 227 that just dropped, including additional information on what you want to do to pick between Okta Classic, Okta Identity Engine, and Okta OIDC to set up your Jamf Connect. That's a lot of talking. I'm going to have some water and answer some questions. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, John.
Well done, Sean.
Okay, well that was very interesting. One of the first questions that we have in is, we deployed Okta Device Trust to our Macs, but the management attestation certificate is untrusted in keychain. Does this pose a problem, and if so, how is this resolved?
So we deployed the certificate, and it's untrusted in the keychain. My first question would be, did you deploy it through Classic Agent, or did you do it through the new OIDC integration? Because if you deploy the certificate down to the device via MDM, it should come in as a trusted certificate because the MDM trusts it. I don't think you need the entire chain of trust inside there. I don't think it's going to affect anything either way. Do you?
If I could
don't
answer.
think, yeah, I don't think it's going to trust anything either way because it's literally the Okta Verify app grabs the certificate and its presence on the device is part of the rule for authentication at that point. Come see me later, though.
Another question, will there be a publicly available package for Okta Verify at some point? VPP isn't always reliable for being able to use, VPP isn't always reliable, and being able to use a package in Jamf Pro would make things a lot easier.
Would you care to make any forward-looking statements today, John?
Oh, I like my job too much, but we're always receptive to the feedback of the customers, and I happen to have the ear of the device team. So I'll keep a look on that one in a moment in the app, and I'll try to follow up and see who submitted that and try to close the loop.
I won't close it then for you. Okay, perfect. Another one here. What does the workflow look like to ship a sealed brand new MacBook to a user when we have Okta Device Trust enabled?
Step 1, push down Jamf Connect. No, your zero-touch enrollment is going to be very similar, but your very first enrollment, the enrollment into Jamf Pro, if it is gated with a single sign-on into your Jamf Pro server, should be your rule for authentication for that group of users, should be that they only have username and password and whatever MFA methods available, I would assume at that point.
That scans.
Yeah, unless they're in a group where they haven't set up MFA ever, in which case you can actually use what's the word I'm looking for? Enrollment customization just shows a web browser, so you can actually sign up a person for MFA at that point, if you're enforcing it.
That jives with our own onboarding flow too. In fact, if someone wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I should be easy to find. And you have further questions, by all means, I'd love to show some of the stuff that we do internally around that, because we're using all these features, and I could share the new employee onboarding workflow.
But the most important piece there is that user's in a group that does not require the device be trusted, because you have to be able to enroll the device to get the device to be trusted. So that's the important part.
Chicken and egg, right?
Yep, exactly. Then once they're actually enrolled, you can drop them into a group that actually gives them, yes, for everything else, I need to get into the Jamf Pro server. I'm an IT administrator. I work for the Okta group. I must come in from a trusted machine. Seem legit?
Sounds legit.
There you go.
I think we're at time.
Let's go. Keep going.
Yeah, another question? Okay, cool. Okay. sorry, I didn't close the one because you're going to answer it later. No, okay. Well, what are the differences between Jamf Device Trust and Jamf Trusted Access? From my understanding, they seem similar, other than an app software has to be integrated with Okta. In other words, locked behind Okta.
Everything ties together. Everything ties together. If it's not completely obvious, because I didn't explain it right, but Jamf's concept of trusted access means that I have a device that's secured, managed, and has the identity of the person on it here. But I don't gate everything. If I want to get into something like Salesforce, I want to get into Jira or whatnot, I got to go to my identity provider. The rest of the trusted access story is to talk to my identity provider and say, hey, John, this computer is managed, it's got Jamf Protect on it, it's in a good state, there's no malware on it, I know that we haven't had any incidents recently, would you please let me into blah?
Let me check my policies. Yeah, you're good.
Sweet, I'm also coming from an IP address that happens to be a good one too. Is that okay for you?
Yeah, I'm down.
Awesome. It all ties together. Trusted access is not a SKU. Trusted access is a concept. Good question, though.
Okay, so, sorry. How about this one? I think this is
Last one, and we'll do that. Yep, there we go.
perfect. This is from an old school user. I think there was some clarification on that. Does the newer device trust, as opposed to the Python script-based one, still have a certificate that expires every year? It requires a Chrome relaunch. That's an old school question, but I think they're using the old school.
The old school Python method with Okta Classic put a certificate in your keychain that it curls down from an endpoint. It also, because it comes in that way, can't be marked as non-exportable, which made it insecure because you just copy pasta that onto another device. Get onto Okta Identity Engine yesterday is the right answer.
And so
there.
there's no need to refresh Chrome, renew, or anything else because we have a SCEP certificate in place.
Well, the Chrome won't kick in at all in this particular case because Chrome's not going to be talking on Okta Verify.
Yeah,
or the
I
Okta
meant to
single
say
sign-on
that there won't be
extension.
any expiry in a sense. Like
But
a
once
one-year
we take over the SCEP certificate via MDM, then you won't have to worry about it. We'll reissue it for you. Life is good.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Brain dates, we're around all the time. Thank you for having us. Mac admin, Slack, life is good.
Well done.